Welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
What do you both think about fear?
I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations. I'm here to live up to mine.
He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life.
Fear is a teacher.
And I don't skip class.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, listeners, family. Today's guest is a passionate storyteller who doesn't just teach history. He makes it breathe, feel, and matter deeply to our hearts right now. David Jones III is a historical fiction author, dedicated American revolutionary storyteller, and the creative force behind DJ3 Media, LLC. With a BA in history from Indiana University and business insight from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, David lives in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where he pours his love for early American history into vivid, character-driven narratives. His debut novel, The Unlikely Life of Oliver Atkinson, a novel of America's founding, follows a young, orphaned, indentured servant who escapes England, stows away on a ship, and finds himself swept into the fire of the Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty, and the birth of a nation. Through all of his eyes, David brings forgotten voices, ordinary courage, moral choices, faith, sacrifice, and the true human cost of freedom to life, especially timely as we approach America's 250th anniversary. What I loved most about David's work is how he bridges the past and present with warmth and purpose. He reminds us that history isn't dusty textbooks or distant dates. It's about real people facing impossible choices, finding faith in the darkness, and building something greater than themselves. David writes not because the world needed another book, but because too many of us grew up thinking history was boring. He proves it's anything but. It's alive, relevant, and filled with lessons on courage, consequence, and the enduring power of liberty. And so let's lean into the journey, his storytelling heart, and the deeper truths he uncovers in our nation's founding. David, thank you for being here.
Uncle Jimmy, I tell you, I've been on a bunch of podcasts, and this is really the one that I've been looking forward to doing most of all. And you've made me wait a month. It's been killing me. So here we are. Let's have some fun and hopefully deliver a really good time for your viewers, your listeners.
I'm super excited. I'm sorry about the wait, right? I tell people, I've been picking up some steam on the podcast end, and people text me and email me, hey, I can't find any dates until July and August. And I go, I'll see you in July and August then,
All right.
And,
well, look, it just says that you're a wanted man, that you're busy, you're productive. The funny thing is I was on a podcast a week or so ago, and she can't air it until next February, she says, stacked. And I said, this is a kind of a 200 America 250 kind of a thing. Is there any way you can bump somebody? And she wouldn't do it. But this is perfect timing. And look, you could have chosen a lot of people, but here we are. So I'm really humbled and thankful.
No, and like I said, I love your storytelling. I've read up all about you, and I'm excited because, I'm here in Boston. We have the history here, and it's a powerful place, right? And I don't know if you watched, what was it, the Ken Burns, the documentary he just put out a little while back?
I have not seen it. It's one of those where I want to sit down and block out a huge piece of time and just go right through it. So I was waiting for them all to be released. Plus, I've been loaded with my own personal stuff and then the book marketing. Writing the book was so much easier than the marketing of these things. So I've been slammed, and I want to give attention to that because I've heard some good things. Yeah, I've heard some good things. Your accent is definitely Boston, and I have family going back to the Mayflower. My mother's father's from Boston, and so I got a lot of heritage there. So we might be cousins somewhere down the line.
That's awesome. So, and that's a big thing I love, right? Because in the Ken Burns story, right, he goes through and he has the stories of people that, were there that nobody knows about, right? That's right. The powerful thing about that journey, right? Because it's not just the John Adams, it's not just the famous people. It's the people behind the scenes, right? And it's so powerful because we're coming up, as I like to say, on our 250 years of our very great, nation, the founding of our nation, this great democracy, right? Hopefully we get to see 250 more, right? Not you and I, we won't be able to see that, but our country alone, right?
Right.
And we're in trying times now, right? When it comes to politics, right? And, I think what should come of this and what could come of this is almost a rebirth of a nation, right? After the Trump era, and
Well, that
and we come out full of fire, and we come out full of passion, right? It could, or we could, go the other way and keep continuing on the path that we are of, fighting one another, right? Because one's a Republican and one's a Democrat, or one's an
sure,
independent, right? There's no
sure.
more conversation anymore today, David. It's all arguments, right? And
Right, and
everybody
that's
thinks,
that's what happened back in the day. The parliament shut down conversation. The founders didn't want to be founders. They wanted to stay British. They saw themselves as being British. They just wanted a voice
yeah,
in the parliament. They wanted to have a right to speak and do more than just localized self-governing. And they didn't want to secede. They didn't want to start another country, but in many ways they were left with no choice. And I think in our age today, one of the motivations for writing my book was 2 years ago. We got our 250th anniversary coming up. How can I monetize this thing? And it kind of, it's very American, right? So, and it led me into a deeper study and a deeper appreciation of not only seeing where we were, but it's really helping me understand where we are today. As entertaining as my book is, I wanted to reintroduce people to everything our founders did, the men and the women, the free and the slave, those who had nothing materially to gain, like my direct descendant Charles Carroll of Carrollton, richest man in the world, nothing materially to gain. He did something. He did this and became a signer of the Declaration of Independence from Maryland as the only Catholic signer because of the ideals of freedom and recognizing uh, God's image in all humanity, and that the King doesn't give us our rights, that they come from God above. And we're kind of in a similar place right now.
yeah. Yeah, and I think, like you said, it all culminated, with the Tea Party, where everyone had enough of the taxes, right? So
Right.
we go and we're gonna throw the tea in the ocean, right? And I laugh because it almost brings me to modern day with today's tariffs, right? Tariffs are just a tax. People don't realize that, right? When are we
That's
gonna
right.
get, when are we gonna raise up and say, hey, enough's enough? Start throwing those politicians in DC into the water, right? Screw the tea, let's start throwing them.
I'd like to scrap them all and start all over again anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a conservative, but I'm one who thinks for myself and thinks independently and actually tries to look at things through a lens of logic, lens of biblical wisdom and faith. Frankly, I'm not crazy about just about anything going up, but throwing them in the Boston. Hey, maybe during our 205th celebration, we can get a bunch of them up there and toss them in Boston Harbor.
Yeah. Throw them all in, right? So
Throw
that's
them
the
all in.
That's the big thing, right? So, David, take us back to the beginning, right? What first ignited your deep passion for early American history in the Revolutionary War era? And how did your studies at Indiana University shape the storyteller you are today?
Well, my parents had a really large library. And I was a lousy student, not because I wasn't smart, it's because of they didn't know what ADHD was back then and dyslexia. So I was a shiny penny guy and could be very distracted in class, was kind of a class clown, and just was not diligent, wasn't devoted and disciplined with my studies. But I go and pick up a book off my parents' shelf in their library, and I'd sit there and read it. And
Yeah.
they had tons of history books. My family goes back to the Mayflower. My family is there's some who's who people in my direct descendants, like I mentioned, Charles Carroll being one of them. And so I think a lot of that is just kind of ingrained within our family culture, the love of history. And then with their books, I was just fascinated by all these human stories. So my dad has a history degree from the University of North Carolina. So I think he passed a little bit of his love of history to me. And then, of course, my mother being an amazing storyteller. Dad would be on the road for work. I remember on many nights, mom would grab a glass of wine and we'd get the fire going and we'd sit and hear stories of all these amazing people in our family's history and her growing up among Hollywood royalty and just so many things. And so the story of humans, biographies has always fascinated me, and their personal stories and what their impact on history was. So I think that's kind of where I got the germ, where I got the seed of my love of history from our family side, from their love of history, from their library. I mean, reading was almost rebellion for me.
Yeah.
And while I wasn't doing my homework, I picked up something from, Berlin Diaries or something like that, and I'd start reading it. And it just fascinated. History, when I got to Indiana, you got to read a ton of history books. And I actually wanted to do Russian studies at first. But then my first year there, the wall came down. And I found Russian language excruciatingly difficult. So I thought, just go history. So little did I know that history degrees don't really do anything unless you're going to go teach history. And I taught history. So I have an expensive out-of-state bill for a degree that, as Matt Damon said in Good Will Hunting, you could have got for $1.25 in late fees at the public library. It's one of my all-time favorite lines. And he was right. So I got stuck with a big bill. But a lot of the history that I read was so dry. It was just like, gosh, chewing on dry oats, if you will. And I was disciplined enough to get through and find the story. And so got my degree, never used it. And later on in life, I started writing screenplays and moved to Hollywood, back to where I go back 5 generations. Like I mentioned to you earlier, my grandfather's from Boston, and my mother is from Los Angeles. They moved there, and I go back 5 generations to Los Angeles. And so lived out there twice and did my Hollywood thing and wrote movies. Never had one go to screen, but I made some money, there are a lot of rich people in Hollywood that have never had a script go to screen. I wasn't one of them, but I made some money. And so I learned how to tell stories. I learned how to make up stories. So later on in life, after I had 2 scripts go to the top of DreamWorks and they get bumped out of the system from the president's desk that came this close, I had 1 script about a young polar bear who hated the cold. And I thought it was a funny premise. And so my manager got it to the top of DreamWorks. They loved it, but said, we're going to pass for now. Well, 4 years later, they came out with their own polar bear story that was very similar. And there's no way I could take on DreamWorks. There's just no way. I mean, they got 100,000 lawyers and I've got like $10 in a couple of coupons. It's not happening. So I was so disappointed and so discouraged at that time after being in Hollywood for a while. I went from never seeing a blank screen to looking at screens and going, I had nothing to say. So you fast forward about 14 years later in 2024, when I had that idea about, well, we got the 250th coming up. How can I make some money? I thought, well, kids in schools these days, they're not always being taught our true history. There's always a revisionist kind of delivery of our history, and everybody's bad back then, and everybody's horrible, and we were greedy and we did this to the Indians, this to blacks, et cetera, et cetera. So there's more to the story, and I know it. And so I wanted to do some rediscovering of our nation's founding myself. And I wanted to be able to present something that was written more Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, adventure-like, than present and make it real sounding than something like, I didn't want to go the Veggie Tale route or some childish kind of presentation. I wanted something that was action like and immersive, and create a character that young people as well as old people could sympathize and identify with, and see through this person's eyes the founding of our nation. So I thought, I'm going to start them in Boston. Makes sense, right? Boston Tea Party, Boston Massacre, Stamp Act, Paul Revere, all the biggies, so many of the biggies are there. And I love visiting Boston and going to all the sites. It's like one of my favorite things to do. And then I go over to Fenway and cheer for whoever's playing the Red Sox, being an Orioles guy, So, and Fenway is just one of my favorite places, but I wanted to start him off in Boston, and I had to come up with a backstory and kind of figure out who this kid was. And so I came up with the name Oliver. And then later on, I came up with the name Atkinson, because a good friend of mine from a high school has done very well in business, got a lot of money, and supports a lot of Christian ministries. And a friend of mine has a global ministry, and I kind of put them two together. And so as a way of saying thank you, I used his last name, Atkinson, for my
Yeah.
character. I decided to start him off in England and made him an indentured orphan. He was a servant to somebody for money he did not owe. So his life was set as an impoverished kid. He had no hope, no chance, no opportunity. And America was something else. And he ended up stowing away on a ship called the Beaver, which is one of the 3 ships ransacked in the Boston Tea Party. And he got discovered almost all the way over, thrown in the brig, and Paul Revere set him free, adopts him, and immerses him in Sons of Liberty culture. And then we see the unfounding of the nation through his eyes. So I wanted somebody that young people could identify with. I wanted somebody that represented a young America, a vulnerable America, one that was kind of indentured to England, and not having a rights or say in their own, their own existence. And so Oliver kind of is a picture of that part of America, that point of
Yeah,
America.
he basically
So
starts his life essentially invisible.
absolutely invisible, and a throwaway kid, like so many
Yeah.
people were. And,
Yeah.
you said something earlier that I think is so important. You mentioned, you got the John Adams, of course, you got the Hancocks, you've got the Sam Adams, and he's more than just beer guys.
Yeah.
You've just got such amazing, brilliant humans all congregating in one place. I mean, has to be divinely ordered for that to happen, seriously. And then you've got this little indentured orphan. Well, he's an example of, and the Sons of Liberty were great because their relationship and their movement wasn't based on social hierarchy, wasn't based on finances or what you did. It was extremely rare because of the cultural norms of that time. And so our guy Oliver could fit right in if he was in agreement with their passion, with their principles, with what their goals were. And it just all made sense to him based upon where he came from. And he is, like I was saying, you mentioned not just the bigwigs. Most of the greatness of our founding came on the backs of people we'll never know.
Yeah. No doubt about it. People will never know, right?
They'll never know.
And again, you have people like, people forget about, James Otis Jr., right? He was a leader who organized spies, right? He's actually the one that sent Paul Revere on his ride. I bet you if you ask people who he was, they wouldn't have a clue who he was, right?
Well, the spy network, nobody really knew who the spy network existed anyway. Paul was very involved in the mechanics,
Yep.
which is a spy network, and it also doubled as his kind of his intelligence gathering for his own black market business dealings. Hancock's as well, because Hancock was also, a guy who was not afraid of sneaking stuff into the country and selling it.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the unlikely life of Oliver Atkinson, right? Oliver witnesses and participates in events like the Boston Tea Party and stands on Lexington Green, right? What research challenges did you face in blending documented historical facts with compelling fictional storytelling? And how did you ensure the history felt authentic?
Such a good question. In approaching this, again, wanting to create something that was understandable and relatable to 12 and up, but also intellectually stimulating, meticulously researched, smart enough for adults. And I think I accomplished that. But one of the things that I had to do is, in taking this young man and seeing the founding from Lexington to, the Continental Congresses and all the other sites, the Southern Campaign, I had to figure out what a timeline would be like, because he's kind of a Forrest Gump-like character in that he's finds himself in the midst of all of this stuff everywhere. And I had to make it real. I had to make it plausible. So it's such a great question. And so I had to figure out a timeline of what was happening where, at what time, what was the mode of technology and transportation and time and loyalists, and I had to figure in a ton of different things. Frankly, I think as I processed everything, I think I got kind of lucky because I was able to find a path from the Boston Tea Party where he landed in America all the way through, and I don't want to give it all away, but to Yorktown. And I found a path.
Yeah.
So in other words, Not every aspect of the revolution and the founding is in the book. That would have been an impossibility. So I wanted to
You don't
find
have
the
enough
most
pages for
interesting.
that.
Well, here's the funny thing. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought, let me see if I get to 10 pages. I got to 10. Well, it turned out I wrote 160,000 words, which is like a 700-page novel. You don't do
Yeah.
that. I didn't know any better. I just kept writing. It just kept going and going. And I was having so much fun doing this. It was a blast. Every day after work, I'd sit and write for a few hours until my brain became mush. But I couldn't put in everything that I wanted to. And so with my publisher, who absolutely loved it, he said, look, you can either do this in 2 books or do some massive consolidation and do it in one. And I thought, the smart thing to do is to do it in one story, which meant I had to cut a lot of great stuff. So I had to cut 60,000 words to get it down to 100,000 words, which is still a long novel. The book is close to 400 pages. And I think I got, again, just blessed. I guess I could say luck, but it's really blessing the Lord, because I was able to tell his backstory. Instead of starting in England when he's on the ship, we are able to get some backstory. And then at the end of the book, I cut out a huge portion of it and told it in an epilogue and then a postscript. So I was still kind of able to sneak in 160,000 words worth of story
Yeah.
in just a little over 100,000 words. I didn't want to have battle scenes that were highly technical. Again, I want the reader to ride with him on the horse and be with him in the meetings and all that kind of stuff. So it's really about the human element more than just, this happened at the Battle of Saratoga and have 20 pages worth of battle stuff. I didn't feel that was going to serve my readers well. And it's really a story about just human, overcoming human challenges that we all face: disappointment, heartbreak, death. Do we really believe what we're fighting for when everything is called and challenged? Do we get up and go fight anyway? Are we really that committed? And so I wanted that kind of passion that these people had to really shine through, as a way of saying, guys, what do you guys believe now? Where's your passion? Where's zeal? Are you willing to lose everything for the sake of freedom, for the sake of truth, for the sake of ideals that are bigger and better than you are?
Yeah. So you've said, right, you wrote this novel because too many people describe history as boring, right? What do you believe is lost when we reduce the Revolutionary War to dry dates and battles? And what do you hope readers gain by experiencing it through all of his coming-of-age journey?
What I think is, I'm not sure anything's lost, because that's the right thing for the right audience. However, the American Revolution, as I've said, and as you volunteered and you get, because you're right up there in the midst of all this stuff, it's about people.
Yep. Yep.
And
About
human
people, their
stories are the best stories. That's why
backstories. Yep.
it's what you do. You get people on and you talk stories. You talk personal stories. You talk why, when, how, etc. And history is happening in the meantime. Whatever we do is part of our contribution to history. And so, I wanted to do something that was exciting. I wanted to take the people that might be interested in the history of our revolution, other than, the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War, Lexington, Concord, shot, heard around the world, and really immerse people in it. And again, as I said a minute ago, get them in the saddle with Oliver, get them, on the prison ship with him, smell the sulfur from the musket ball shot that's been expelled, and really get them feeling it, not just reading about it, but living it with the story with Oliver as he goes through his journey. And Brad Pitt said, not every character has to grow. And I agree with him, but this one did. You cannot go through something like this and go from being an indentured servant in England, running away to America, and then falling in with these guys and not change.
Yeah.
And he's idealistic, and then we watch him grow into something else. We see his growth over a 7-year period. And, I wanted to find his arc. And his arc is really, it's America's story. It's our story. And again, I wanted everybody to have something they could personally identify with. If all we're talking about is dry facts, it's kind of hard to find ourselves in there. But when we personalize it and humanize it, we can all go, wow, okay. All right. I love that. That was moving, emotional. It was entertaining. That was funny. That was inspiring. So again, hopefully I've accomplished that.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, like you said, getting the people on the horse with them, right? Getting people in the room with them, having that smell, right?
Yes,
In your head, bringing you there, right? You can picture yourself being
exactly.
on the horse with them. You can picture them being in the room, right? And that's the powerful, way of. And I can't wait to get my hands on the book because I'm gonna order it. I'm gonna order it. I can't wait to read it. One of my favorite authors is Doris Kearns Goodwin. I love
Oh
her.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
She's awesome. I read the book. There
Sure.
was a couple different presidents in there. And she was talking about Lincoln and how Lincoln was taken out of school at a young age and barely completed school. And his first book he ever read, it was like the old, I used to hear my father say, I had to walk to school 10 miles in barefoot. Lincoln literally had to walk like 8 miles to the local library to
Yes.
get his first book and back. It was
Yeah.
powerful, right? But it's our story. It's our history that, people like her, people like you that are getting people engaged by your storytelling. I love it. I love it. Right. So the
Well,
book
that is the American spirit. We're overcomers.
yeah. Yeah.
We look at a challenge and we find a way to kick its butt. We
Yeah.
overcome. And
Yeah.
there's a cost to it. We're kind of soft these days.
Yeah.
There's a
No doubt about
cost to all these things. And Abraham, your father, my grandfather on my dad's side had an 8th grade education.
it.
His
Yeah.
mother had they were white trash sharecroppers in the fields of North Carolina. And they rose up and he became one of the leading bankers in the state of North Carolina. And he would walk across the tracks and give handshake loans out to blacks when no other white dude was doing it. So again, it's all about the personal story that drives history. History doesn't happen independently, of course. And so your story, Jimmy, and mine, we're contributing to the American story. So the question is, what are we doing to overcome, to make life better for ourselves and for others, and to continue long after we're gone this great American experiment?
Yeah. Like I said, we're coming up on 250, so hopefully we get 250 more, right? As I said, right?
Let's get to 251.
With the current political climate, we're not going to get into it, but who knows if we'll even see the 250 the way it's going now, right? So
Yeah.
the book, right? The book explores heavy themes of courage, faith, moral choices, sacrifice, and the true cost of freedom, right? Which of these themes hit closest to your home for you personally as you wrote all of his story?
Two things. It would be evidently the cost that they were willing to pay for the ideals that were higher than them, recognizing that we're all made in the image of God, and they had an opportunity to do something that had never been done in history. And that is create a union that would allow all men created in God's image to rise up and be all that God made them to be. Now, of course, we had some hiccups along the way. There was some issues that we never would have unified as the 13 colonies and overcome British tyranny had we let slavery be the dominant issue. But by the end of the war, 9 out of 13 colonies had abolished slavery altogether. And even Georgia, by the time 1773 hit, abolished deportation of slaves. So there was a movement there. But we had to, I think it's the cost. I think the political cost. I mentioned my direct descendant, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, Maryland, had
Yeah.
nothing materially to gain. So I think the cost would be the first thing. And the second thing was the faith of these men and women. Now, today we've secularized so much. We say we've got this separation of church and state and keep your religion to yourself and stuff. But it was the Bible, and it was the Great Awakening that came before it that really transformed colonial society and gave them the moral backbone and gave them the Bible from which our Constitution came from, and set a foundation for us to build on and work towards, as Thomas Jefferson wrote, a more perfect union. Not a perfect union, that's the kingdom of God,
Yeah.
but a more perfect union. And so the faith of these people, most of the men were very devout Christians, Congregationalists, Anglicans, Baptists, and then Charles Carroll was the only Catholic. But these are men and women that just trusted Providence and believed that they were doing right. And they stood on their faith. They stood on the word of God. And as a result, any society without a moral backbone, without a moral compass, without a foundation of where we get our authority from is just not going to last. In our case, had that not been there, we never would have begun.
Yeah.
So I'd say the cost, and then of course just the devotion to Christ and the desire to see opportunity and freedom for all, an earthly example of a heavenly kingdom. And of course, we're humans, so we're going to mess things up. But we've done a lot of good as a nation as a result of our Christian heritage and as a result of our own devotion to the Lord and the Scriptures.
So as we approach, right, America's 250th anniversary, why do you feel the Revolutionary War era remains urgently relevant to our lives today, especially in conversations about liberty, unity, and moral responsibility?
Well, it's because I think much of where we've come from is forgotten. It's one of the reasons why I ended up writing the book. I wanted it to be entertaining, but really introduce people into rediscovering why we exist, what brought us into existence, and where are we in relationship to that? How far have we moved off course? And hopefully inspire people to remember the cost of the founding of our country, the hope and the promise of the founding of our country, and to be inspired to live with the same moral conviction to create a nation where all can thrive. And I think we've kind of lost that in many ways. We've never been a perfect country, never will be, but I think we're really wandering way, way off course right now. And whether you're left or right or what have you, I think my hope is that, and again, I'm I'm not naive to think that my book is going to change America, but it might impact a few people. And maybe it's one of those people that does something great.
Yeah.
One can only hope for something like that. When you do your podcast, you want to inspire people. You want to see greatness elevated. You want to see the right things done through people's lives. That's why you introduce them. And that's the same way I want to do as an author. I'm just trying to do it in an entertaining way, being historically factual. And I hope that America, again, just reintroduces themselves to the founders, both the majored people as well as the lesser people, and ask themselves questions. Would these people be proud of me today? Am I doing them? Am I doing them proud? Am I honoring what they sacrificed to get me everything that I have today? And I'd say most of us are doing an okay job, but we could probably do a better job.
Yeah. And I think, one of the biggest things we have to do, right, as Americans is put aside the partisan politics and start looking at each other as Americans, as our neighbors, as our community, right? Instead of
Yes.
so much identifying, right? Identity politics. Now everyone wants to identify with what, Paul, my father told me growing up, there's two things we don't talk at the dinner table. That's politics and religion, And now that's everybody wants to be a political pundit and everyone wants to, I say it now, right? The biggest thing is just because you argue and shout and scream your point doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it, because I say he who shouts loudest, you're not winning the argument. And I tell people when it comes to politics that we shouldn't have arguments. It should be
Right.
conversations, right?
Yes.
And I
Hey,
say
look, when we process through all these things, Jimmy, and we have conversations, we treat people like humans,
yeah,
and we learn their story. We learn why they get to this story. It's not fake empathy, but we shouldn't have toxic empathy either. But we learn why people think the way they do. I think so often because they're on the left, we assume they're this.
yeah,
On the right, we assume they're that. And as you could tell, I'm a personal story guy. I'm a biography. I like everybody's biography. I ask people all the time that are radically different from me, about who they are, why they are. I want to get to know them. And when we can have a conversation about things that are important to us respectfully, we may not at the end of that discussion still see, we may not see eye to eye even then. But what we've done is we've kind of tenderized the surface in hopes of trying to have more of those. But nobody screaming and yelling is ever going to convert anybody. So
Nope.
as a Christian who's interested in converting people, seeing them come to know Christ as their Lord and Savior, if all I'm doing is screaming and yelling at them, well, first of all, I'm not good enough to save anyone. I'm a sinner in need of a savior. And so I share that good news with people. And then I let the Holy Spirit do the rest of the work. Politics, because I grew up in politics. My dad worked for a couple of presidents. He actually, on our bicentennial anniversary, had a picnic on the White House lawn, played Frisbee and catch with my brother and family. And it was a big deal. It was a really cool experience. So I used to play in the White House as a kid. Politics, there's a purpose for politics, but the fact is we've come to a point where we don't discuss anymore. Neither side is talking very well with each other. And that wasn't the case for most of our history. We'd certainly yell and scream at each other, but we talk through things. You know, we go to the back room, light a cigar, get a single malt scotch, and we work things out. And then, of course, for the public's sake, we go back and have our contentions and stuff. But we all had the same desire. We wanted a better America. I'm not sure that's the case these days.
Yeah, the politicians would go to the back room of the Dubliner down in D.C.
Yeah.
They'd light their cigars and they would talk, and then, they would hash things out. And again, I think that's the problem now, is that both sides are so stubborn that they don't want to reach across the aisle. And for our democracy, right, it's key. It's vital to reaching across the aisle and having that cooperation, right? And I loved what you said, right? Sitting down and talking with people and getting to know them, but also, right, getting to know their side, right, of why I voted for Trump or why I voted for Biden, right? And then actually seeing, right, where they come from, why they did it, why they did. But instead, everybody's like, oh, you voted for Trump, and they want to scream and yell. I want to know, hey, why did you vote for him? What do you think he could do that would better you and your family, your community?
Well, the thing is, there are assumptions about people who voted for Trump. You don't have to be MAGA to have voted for Trump.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a hyper leftist, socialist, communist to have voted for Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
There's just two worldviews. And I think the left has been taken over by socialists / communists. Right? That's not a cut. That's just a reality.
Yeah.
So their version of America is really kind of anti-American. It's not pro-republic. It's not really pro-democracy, no matter what they say. On the other side, on the right side, I disagree with the left's contention that Trump wants to be a king, though he probably does in his heart of hearts. But I'm not sure that that's a complete accurate picture of him. But he certainly is legislating in many ways through his executive orders in a hyper-controlling way. So I have concerns for both sides. I mean, it's just like, let's just get back to the playbook. Let's get back to the Constitution. Let's all be pro-America and pro-freedom, and allow the other side to have a voice, because if all we're doing is trying to silence the other side, that is so un-American. And the founders, they didn't agree on a lot of stuff. They did a Federalist Papers. You read about all that. You read the hashing out. I mean, there was fisticuffs and guns drawn and all kinds of stuff. So it was a little wacky back then at times too. But at the end of the day, they still had a similar vision of America that they wanted to bring forth. And I think that's it. That's, again, part of my book, is to reawaken and reintroduce people to why this nation came into existence in the first place. And hopefully it will have some impact. Hopefully it will inspire some. And hopefully through this podcast of yours, it's just going to go global. And we're going to see a great American revival and get back to our senses and start loving our neighbor and start, showing consideration and kindness to all people regardless. And do the things that we used to do. I don't know about your mom and your dad. Back in the neighborhood that I grew up in, we knew everybody's business. We knew who was not like us, who was like us, and yet we had such a great community. They're our neighbors, and that mattered. And so they were embraced and brought into our home, and different, even though my dad was in politics working for a couple of Republican presidents, the Democrats were over, they'd be hanging out, having a good time. We'd be playing ball with their kids in Little League and all that stuff. And it was a community. We didn't hate each other. In spite of that, we didn't hate each other at all. We were Americans. We saw each other as Americans first. Now,
we saw each other as brothers and sisters, right?
I think so. I mean, that's kind of a kumbaya thing to say, but you're right. Back in my neighborhood, that was it. In fact, let me tell you this. My high school closed in 1985. It was only open 23 years, but from it has come Emmy Award winners, Oscar winners, astronauts, four-star generals, who's who in media, entertainment, design. I mean, honestly, Book Brothers writing a book about it. It's amazing the people that came out of this high school. Amazing, just a who's who. You'd know a bunch of the people if I started listing them off.
Yeah.
But we closed in 1985. I started a Facebook page for the high school in 2008, thinking maybe you'll get 100 people. Well, we're almost at about 4,000 people. We have annual reunions every year back in the neighborhood. People come from all over the world. And a lot of them are in their 70s, and, some of them are, hitting 80 and stuff. And then the younger guys are in like their early 50s. But we all get together and, we put politics aside. We put all this nonsense aside, and we just love on each other and have a great time for a weekend. And then we go back home, and then we'll see you next year. We've been doing that for years. We've been doing that for years, and it's because we have something more important together, and that's our incredible neighborhood that we grew up in, our high school, and who cares that it closed? I know people that never go to high school reunions. Every year, it's like the big thing, man. It's such a cool deal, and we have such celebrations the whole weekend, and that's kind of what we need more of, and I'm grateful that these folks are that it matters to them, and that we can go back to the neighborhood and just remember the good old days when we talked to each other, and we had a good time. And we went parking with their girlfriends, and we played sports, and cruised the neighborhood, and tried to make curfew, but rarely ever did. It was just a good time back then.
Yeah.
I missed that kind of vibe.
Yeah. And like you said, the sense of community, and that's been lost, I think, everywhere. And so now, right, you run DJ3 Media LLC as your vehicle for this creative
Yes.
work, right? What has the journey of building a media and publishing presence around historical storytelling taught you about resilience, purpose, and bringing meaningful stories into the world?
It's been a blast. I would not say I'm quite an empire yet. I have a YouTube channel called Oliver's History Project, where what I've done is I've created 90 videos that run about a minute and a half on the true history found in the novel.
Okay.
You've got Oliver as a character. And so I wanted to do something really cool and supportive and kind of different for marketing my book. So I created Oliver's History Project, and I released 5 videos a week between late February and July 4th. So that was part of my mission. I also created a trailer, which you can find under playlist at Oliver's History Project. And then for my book, there's a million books published, a lot of self-publishing stuff, and publishers, whether I had a New York publisher offer me a contract and then a smaller publisher. And I went with the smaller one because I wanted some hand-holding. I wanted to make sure I had personal attention. But the reality is that publishers don't market your book for you. So you got to do the work. So the journey has been, the easy part was writing the blasted thing, doing the research, and sitting down day after day. And by the way, I call it a father-son project. I'd sit down and write. I just felt the blessing and the joy of the Lord. And it was just like back in the day, you got into the garage, you built a go-kart with your father over the weekend. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter whether it worked well or not. You had bonding time, and it was a cool thing that you did. And that's kind of what this project's been like for me. So when I figured out what I needed to do with my book, and I had some great editors, and my publisher's just been fantastic. Simply Francis Publishing, and they've been just amazing to work with. But I had to get out there and figure out how to sell this thing and how to get it in the hands of people. So I have part of my DJ3 Media LLC has been to develop those trailers, those videos, and then create as broad a guerrilla marketing campaign as I could to get on as many podcasts that I felt were relevant to read. I've got my book exploding in homeschool groups and schools. I'm speaking to an adult book readers club. I've got churches in different parts of the country that want me to come talk about faith and freedom. I'm going to be part of curriculum. I've got about 3 curriculum companies that want to add it. I'm in Books A Million, and just so I'm doing everything I possibly know to do to try to get my book out there. So there's nothing glamorous about this. It's real, just hard work. But when and I never get tired. I mean, you want to see results. You want to add water and stir and have something happen, right? It's
Yeah.
not a reality. It takes time. You got to build it. But I think of what our forefathers went through in building something. So I have no complaints, and try to make it a joyful journey as possible, and just do my best. And then just trust that if this is something the Lord wants to explode beyond what it's already done, then fantastic. But I do have one guy who's talking to me about creating a mini series for Netflix around it. So yeah, and by the way, when I wrote it, borrowing from my screenwriting background, I actually wrote it in as such to be a mini series, at least a 6-episode mini series, if not 10. So as you read it, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel, just that movement through the book and go, man, I could see this as a movie. In fact, on my Amazon reviews, I got a bunch of people saying, man, this ought to be a movie. So that's part of the media empire that you asked about. Just doing everything I know to do. I mean, if there's something I haven't done, somebody show me so I can go do it, because I've got the energy, I've got the passion, and sometimes I'll pick up a copy of my book and I'll just read a page and go, my goodness, how did that come from me? That's pretty good. And so seriously, I mean, I've written stuff before and I thought, I'll never show anybody this. This stinks, but not this book.
I can't wait until we wrap up here. When we wrap up, I'm going to go order it off of Amazon. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Thank you.
So 2 more questions before we end, right? Vulnerability and consequence run through your narrative.
Mhm.
Characters face real fear, loss, and the weight of decisions. How do you balance the hardship with hope in a way that leaves readers inspired rather than discouraged?
Well, life is supposed to be hard. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be difficult. We live in a fallen world, fallen humans. Jesus said, this life you'll have many tribulations, but behold, I have overcome the world and overcome through faith. We just trust in him. We do our best. And the human condition is suffering and disappointment and heartbreak and loss. And so my story is full of that. But at the same time, these people whose hearts are being broken, the disappointments, the struggles, the injustice and stuff, they continue to press forward for something great. They continue to press forward for something larger than themselves. They continue to press forward because deep down inside them, the real hope is only going to come if they actually get up out of the bed each day and go do the job. And so I wanted it, again, to be a human condition, something we could all identify with. And if we're all honest, we all have vulnerabilities and insecurities and doubts. We have moments of crisis, and we sometimes look in the mirror and go, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're going to do it. In fact, I don't even like who I'm looking at right now, but you know what? I ain't quitting. I'm getting up and I'm going to get back on the horse. I'm going to go do my absolute best. And so that's what Oliver does. And there's no reason, the unlikely life is just life never should have happened. And frankly, apart from a few people that were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, the rest of us had to work. And we have to get up every day and go at it. And I wanted to show people that, not every effort pays off. There's a lot of pain. But then in the end, if your passion, if your motive, if your purpose is right, in the end, I think you see some really amazing things happen. And it may not be rewarded in this lifetime. And that's really what these founders inevitably said. They had an earthly understanding, but they had a heavenly perspective, which is the only way this nation can be born. And I think we all should, because we're only here for a blip. We never know we're going to get off the conveyor belt, and we got to be prepared. Oliver's story discusses some of that a little bit. And, again, I wanted people to go, it's okay to be broken and hurt. It's okay to be vulnerable, but don't quit. Don't give up. And you're not alone.
So looking at the broader impact of your work, right? What do you believe is the most important legacy a storyteller can leave when bringing America's founding to life for new generations?
Well, first, I think it has to be interesting. I think it has to be well written. It has to be entertaining. There was an age where the drier history book was more the norm. We're in an age where people's attention can be distracted and redirected to YouTube shorts and videos and reels and ball games and everything else. So you got to compete with a whole lot of stuff. So if you can take history and write it in a compelling way, in an interesting way that people can identify with and be true in this telling of the history, you may have something, create interesting characters. Take those marble statues of Washington and of Revere and of Adams and Patrick Henry and all these others and breathe life into them, turn them from marble statues and just people on a page into have them write in such ways that they come alive. You feel them, you brush up against them, you smell their scent, you feel their breath. Immerse the reader in it, get them involved, because the best story is the one where we don't want to put it down. Why? Because we're in there. There's a momentum to the story, and that good storytelling will take you through a historical trip. And next thing you know, you get to the other end and a nation's been founded, and you go, wow, that wasn't dry at all. That was really cool. I learned something about then, and I think I can apply some of that today.
So, David, thank you for sharing your passion, your thoughtful insights, and the heart you've poured into bringing Oliver's unlikely life and our nation's story so vividly to us. Your work is a beautiful reminder that history is not just something we study, it's something we feel, learn from, and carry forward with courage and gratitude. In a world that sometimes feels divided or uncertain, stories like yours reconnects us to faith, sacrifice, and shared purpose that help build something extraordinary. For anyone listening who was moved today, let it be the invitation to pick up The Unlikely Life of Oliver Atkinson, to feel the heartbeat of America's beginnings, and to remember that ordinary lives can still shape extraordinary futures. To connect with David Jones III and dive deeper into his storytelling, visit his website at www.davidjones3.com. You can learn more about the novel, watch videos on the real history, and find upcoming appearances. The book is available now on Amazon and in bookstores. I'm going to be picking it up right after I finish here, so I'm excited. If this conversation touched your heart, please share it with a friend, a family member, or anyone who needs a fresh, hopeful connection to our shared American story. David, we're so grateful you joined us. Your voice and your work are a true gift. Keep telling these stories. The world needs them, my friend.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you so much. Peace and love. Peace and love. Uncle Jimmy out.